So I got the key for Echoes of the End Enhanced Edition for some reason without even knowing what the game is. Quickly after starting the game I've realized it's the exact same style as new God of War games. Alright, that's ballsy to copy such a game because it can easily go wrong. Finished the game after around 15 to 20 hours on max difficulty, so this is a full review. Since a few months ago full reviews are only on Patreon and Subscribestar. Link to video explaining why is in the description. Due to the game being a shorter one, I didn't want to do an early review and full review, there was no point in doing so. Though due to time constraints it's gonna be a shorter review than usual cause there's 2 new games coming out these days, you overwhelmed bastards. Echoes of the End released in August 2025 and Enhanced Edition released these days which revamps combat, balancing and some other things. Can't compare Enhanced and the regular version because I haven't played the regular one. Echoes of the End tells a story about Rin, her people, her kidnapped brother and Abram, a mysterious old guy who joins Rin after helping her. It's a very similar setup to Atreus and Kratos, with one character being playable and the other one serving as a backup with their powers helping in combat and outside of combat. Story takes us through parts of the world controlled by Rin's tribe. Special protective wards that look like large glaciers are being destroyed and there's hints about a secret invading army led by the villain Auric and his vestige Zara. Interesting villains, but unfortunately Auric doesn't get enough screen time to shine. I really think he could have shined more, but it's difficult to care about a character if they are rarely present.
Ah, brother is it. How poetic. My search for your father ends disappointingly at his grave, and now fate sees fit to guide both his children into my grasp. We have a word for that, don't we, Sarah?
I do. Destiny.
Perhaps that's exactly what it is. But the word I was thinking of is opportunity. A chance for all of us to get something that we want.
Let him.
Zara is a typical female villain seen plenty of times before that just wants to destroy everything because she is sick of having to be careful with her rare powers. Why should she be careful around others and not the other way around mentality? She does have a somewhat interesting backstory even though it becomes quite predictable fast who she really is. Story overall is okay, but nothing that good or great. Mostly the good writing aspects are the mysterious lost cities and learning about the lore of the world. This kept me interested, though it's all a bit superficial. Unfortunately, the game suffers from a big problem that I'll mention later that takes the player out of the story characters and everything else, so the story keeps losing itself over and over. Also, there's unexplained resolution at the end with the brother, which I won't spoil here. Something big happens and it's never explained how or why, it just happened. Ending was disappointing with what happened with the brother and Zara. There is another issue aside from the biggest one that I'll cover later, the main character. This game stinks of the AI company affecting the character writing. I couldn't find any info online about it, so maybe there were no outside hires to help with the writing. If this is the intended developer vision for a main character, then they have given a great example of how characters that should fit certain narratives do not have a place in gaming or anywhere else for that matter because they don't add anything and instead take away from the experience. Rin is an obnoxious, all-powerful Sauron's eye between legs character. Talks down on her brother and Abram constantly. Most of her lines seems like she wants to roll her eyes at everything and she's got an annoying voiceover.
Sentries? For what?
An army.
There's no way an army could make it this far into the border undetected.
No, I suppose not. Bless whichever Haven designed that particular safety feature.
Stop marveling. We need to get back up there.
Any ideas?
I'm working on it.
While her brother and Abram are in constant awe of every little thing she does. Abram, an old guy with far more knowledge than her, constantly pats her on the back saying stuff like "great work" after every solved puzzle or "you made light work of them" after every fight.
Neat. Looks like we've done it.
You really are a natural with this stuff. Ha! You made light work of them.
You better appreciate what I'm putting myself through here, Abram.
It hurts the game having such an unlikable main character. During chapter 8 she finally becomes a likable human being, but the game has 10 chapters, so most of the time we have to put with her obnoxious self and constant pampering from others. Such a shame, because clearly Rin could have been a much better character overall, but the writers had to fuck it up for the sake of whatever forced view they wanted to project. If they made her obnoxious in first few chapters and then made the switch for the better early on, it would have been so much better character progression, because at chapter 8 communication with Abram becomes much better, as both characters seem to hit it off nicely after that, with a much better relationship emerging from it all. At times I wanted to scream at the screen things that Abram should have said to her to kick her in the balls properly, but he is just a servant to the writer's poor vision of the main character for the first 7 chapters. Alright, let's switch to gameplay. Linear gameplay that consists of puzzle solving, traversals and fighting. Now we get to the biggest problem, which is pacing of the game. Unfortunately, it's ruined by way too many puzzles. I like puzzles in games like these, as they add different dynamics to the game, but the problem is when there's too much, the pace of the game suffers. Player gets taken away from the story for the time needed to solve the puzzle. And if it's not something lore related, then it's just a nuisance that slows down progression to a crawl. Don't get me wrong, some of the puzzles are brilliant, but there's way too many of them and way too many elaborate ones that take some time to solve. Some of them are also not clear enough in what needs to be done, and some of them lack execution precision. Seems like developers wanted to artificially prolong game time with so many puzzles, because without them it would be a much shorter time to beat. In my opinion, best part of the game is the last chapter, where things unfold in a way that there's more pressure in terms of fighting with shorter traversal puzzles that don't affect the pace at all and instead add an interesting twist to the location. There's also way too many anything but walking traversals. I get that it's more interesting than walking, but when it's all the time, then the questions like how the hell did the enemies get there then arise. Makes no sense. But alright, I can understand that more so than so many puzzles. World itself is full of interesting looking locations with different biomes and decent views to enjoy. It gives a sense of openness in a linear game, which is a good thing.
Come here if she knew even half of this.
I'm sure there's a lot of things your mom would never let you do. Come on, we're nearly there.
Now to talk about combat a bit. It's good. Framework is well done and there's moves and abilities that allow advanced combos. I really appreciate when developers put effort into framework so that positioning and movement matters instead of adding cheap distance covering attacks, attack animations with too much feet sliding and too much tracking in attacks. There are some instances of delayed attacks with instant end frames, but it's not as bad as in other games that love to do it to add a cheap difficulty layer, because in Echoes it's easy to get free space between enemies. There's a big focus on staggering. Every attack staggers and interrupts attacks. Light attack can interrupt every attack except red ones. Heavy attacks can interrupt red ones. By combining light and heavy attacks with powers, we can essentially perma-stun enemies frequently when 1 versus 1.
By the 8. I know.
Couple bosses can be easily killed with the perma-stun method. I think there is a missing poise system here that would allow enemies to recover better. Even better if the enemies had defensive moves to get out of attack range or simply block our attacks. That would be incredible, but instead they only attack and get hit. Highlight of combat are vestige powers. Main one being telekinetic that allows throwing enemies into each other, throwing rocks and stuff into enemies, pushing them off the cliff, into traps. Then there's blast, sword throw, vortex and whatnot. Powers work great in a methodical combat like this. There's enough space to play with everything and use powers tactically. It's quite satisfying too. There are a couple big issues with combat. One is that target lock and then switching targets is a pain. It seems that the game only recognizes switching from target to target if both targets are on the camera. Everything outside the camera's range cannot be switched to. Seems like that's the issue. Or if that isn't, then something else is the reason why target switching is terrible. This creates lots of problems. Another issue is broken finishing animations. I love the finishing animations in this game, but unfortunately it's 50-50 if it's gonna be a broken animation or a good one. Such a shame. More blood would be nice too, considering we are chopping off heads and limbs.
Looks like it was just surrender already.
Echoes of the End has couple bosses with two that we fight again. Only boss I had trouble with was the last one. Others are quite easy even on hard difficulty. Couple of reasons why. Most bosses have shallow movesets and can be perma-stunned the same way normal enemies can. Overall, boss fights are a mixed bag. Unfortunately, the only reason why I had some issues with the last boss is because we can die easily on hard difficulty by being hit a few times. Same problem I had with God of War. Simply not a good design, as it adds nothing but frustration and makes the main character appear too weak. Such increase in damage output from the enemies also doesn't allow combat to breathe a bit, to have proper back and forth. Instead, get hit couple times and it's over. That's one of the ways developers try to offset the lack of ways for enemies to challenge the player. Obvious problem is the lack of defensive options, so enemies can't do anything against us when we attack, unless they hyper armor through it.
Witness the fabulous might.
Another thing I don't like in games is when they create checkpoints where we replenish health, mana and whatever else, and then ignore their own system by using autosave checkpoints that as well replenish everything and puts us right before the fight where we died. What's the point of the checkpoint system then? Autosave checkpoints are fine, but then don't give us a free get out of jail card by replenishing everything. That kills any sort of success-based progression. The game has a drain mechanic that works nicely where we drain health from enemies and replenish ours. It's a perfect mechanic for success-based progression, as it would increase the risk factor in every fight. So if they reduced superficial damage output increase on hard difficulties and removed auto checkpoint replenishment, there would be a really good layer of progression difficulty from fight to fight, which would make things far more interesting. Alright, final verdict time. For me, Echoes of the End is a decent AA God of War style game. I give it a 6, which translates to a decent, solid, above average game. I can also see a score of 5 being realistic. 7 is a stretch, as it would mean it's a good game. It is a good game for the last couple chapters, but that's only a quarter of the game. Patreon, Subscribestar and merch links in the description. Full reviews are there, as this is an exception. Thanks for watching.